we kind of have a place in our mind where we can think about the death of our parents, because that's kind of the expected way things happen. But a child, it's just we weren't prepared for that. All those experiences and all of that knowledge did nothing to prepare me for my own broken heart. And I wrote across the mirror, "What now?"
In 2004, Becky Russell tragically lost her 16-year-old daughter, Jae Lynn, in a car accident, and more recently has faced stage 4 cancer. On today's episode of the CARTI Hopecast, we get the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about her journey. Welcome to the CARTI Hopecast, where we explore stories that shape us, journeys of resilience, hope, and perseverance. We seek the lessons that emerge when we face the unexpected and find strength in the struggle. I'm Adam Head, your host, and today I have the privilege of speaking with Becky Russell, a clinical educator, mentor, and parent who has experienced unimaginable loss. Becky shares her journey of grieving the tragic loss of her daughter and recently overcoming her own battle with cancer. Today, she offers insights into resilience, healing, and finding hope in the midst of grief. Let's dive into Becky's story and the wisdom she's gained along the way. Becky, it's great to have you on the CARTI Hopecast today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm eager to talk about your story, both as a parent and a cancer survivor. But first, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. The weather's beautiful. I've got a little bit of travel planned in my future, and just enjoying retirement. You know, they've only been retired for about 2 to 3 years, and is everything I thought it would be.
Well, speaking of that, I had a chance to look at your blog, Weepy Seeds.
Yes.
And you were talking about everyone having courage to tell their own story. And I thought it was neat how you were giving bullet points of your own story and a lot of transparency, which we're going to talk about.
Right.
But you mentioned travel.
Yes.
And taking advantage of that. And I was just wondering if you'd share some places maybe that you've wanted to go, that you've gotten to visit, and where do you still have plans to go visit? Well,
on my bucket list still is Switzerland. I do want to go there. Last year, Adam, I went on a bus trip. It was called a trip around the British Isles. And anyway, we went to Scotland, London. We started in London, went to Scotland, England, Wales, the Highland. It spent 23 days in a motor coach just going around. And it's really not that big of a geographical place. My daughter reminded me, she said, think of it more like Texas than, the United States. And I worried that I wouldn't like being away from home that much. But every day was better, and I will never, for as long as I live, top that trip. It was amazing. We just had the best time. I was with friends, with my husband. I was feeling good, and now I do love, just going by the beach and sitting by the ocean. I do love that. And so I have friends that cruise, and we enjoy that. But that motor coach tour was not going to be topped. I am looking forward to doing a fall foliage in the U.S.
Oh.
Yeah, kind of want to do that. Actually, I was scheduled to do that a couple years ago when I had surgery instead. So doctor wouldn't release me from the bus. I was grateful.
Don't have to think about anything on the bus tour. They just take you where you need to go.
You're right. You are absolutely right. You can nap if you want. You just get to enjoy the scenery. It is definitely a lazy way to travel. Wonderful.
Well, I'm glad you've gotten to do that. Well, you've shared openly, Becky, about the tragic loss of your 16-year-old daughter, Jae Lynn, in 2004. It's been just over 20 years now since she passed. Tell us, if you would, about that first year after losing your daughter, and then maybe your own grief process since that time.
As Adam, I shared with you a little bit ago that I'm a registered nurse, intensive care. So I have been present when people would be notified of the death of their child or their husband or someone in their family that they loved. I have been by countless bedsides as people passed away and the family was with them, and I was assisting them and, brokenhearted for them with whichever loss. Some losses were unexpected and tragic. Some were expected and peaceful. And then after about 10 years of intensive care nursing, I went and I was faculty on the nursing school. And one of my topics that I taught to young nurses was grief. And I loved teaching that because, I feel like I was talking to a bunch of compassionate people in the group. I was compassionate, had experienced it. All those experiences and all of that knowledge did nothing to prepare me for my own broken heart. I had no idea that people could hurt that bad. And so, it created an internal transformation that was a tortured process. It was not something that I wanted to do. I felt like I was on a journey that I didn't plan on, that was unexpected. It's just out of order for you to bury a child. We kind of have a place in our mind where we can think about the death of our parents because that's kind of the expected way things happen. But a child, it's just we weren't prepared for that. So, and the other thing is, not only could I not cope, but my husband couldn't cope, and our 2 surviving daughters couldn't cope. So the whole house is just leveled. We did have great family, wonderful friendships. We had a strong faith, but there's something called post-traumatic growth. We talk a lot about post-traumatic growth. That's real. It's not necessarily distress. There was a lot of distress, but it's not a syndrome that is negative, the post-traumatic growth, but it comes from a negative circumstances, and you're just so much different, and you have grown so much as a person because of what you've been through with that. And so I'm a testimony to that. I don't think anything about her death was good, but there's been a lot of good that has come out of it. And, 20 years ago, we didn't have, Google was maybe out there, but nobody used it much. Well, I'm a learner, and so I wanted to learn about grief. And surprisingly, grief resources 20 years ago were difficult to find. Not so much now. But, what a change it has made in me.
Well, post-traumatic growth, if you can just talk about that you're also mentoring other grieving parents over time. I know you said that, at the time, perhaps even though you helped to do that as a clinical educator, as a nurse, that, when your world got turned completely upside down, maybe that's evolved, quite a bit over time. But how did you shift, I guess, how you would mentor others, over the years?
One of the things that I recall doing is when people would come to me or talk to me, I really wanted to connect with other mothers or fathers who had lost a child. And one of the things that I remember asking them is, will this get better? And without exception, they all said, yes, it will get better. And in my mind, I was struggling with that because I thought, Jae Lynn will always be gone. Therefore, I will always hurt like this. I will never not miss her. I couldn't imagine not hurting like this because I felt like she was going to be absent for the rest of my life. But then I would look at these parents and I would say, I could see that they had joy, that they laughed, that they were back involved in life, and they seemed to have moments of joy. And so while I didn't feel it, I looked at them and that was kind of a life preserver for me. So over time, I thought I needed to be able to help others. As a nurse, you're just kind of hardwired to look out for others and to care for others. And I wanted to do that. And so a friend and I, we kind of started a group. It was called Bereaved Parents of the USA. It's a national organization with just local chapters. There's a meeting once a month. We have special events, Christmas candlelight events. And the core members, there are several of us that have been there for years. But we all know when someone shows up, brand new, bereaved, and they're just lost, man, we all know what to do because we've all been there. And so helping others is just kind of my life's work with this, or it has been anyways, given me a lot of healing.
Well, that kind of leads nicely into a question that I had, and that's just about empathy. in general. I wanted to talk about that. And certainly spending time in the cancer world, it's something that honestly, I think a lot of people are afraid of. You don't know what to say sometimes to someone who has faced just immense tragedy in their own lives. And so can you talk a little bit about that? And, there's certainly a connection with others. I think you're describing to other people who have faced a similar loss, but for others who maybe haven't faced something like that, but they want to step in and be with someone and be present with them. What does that look like to you?
Well, I think that, empathy, we've always had the word, of course, but there's a lot more exploration of that word here in the last decade or two. I suspect that all your employees at CARTI are highly compassionate people. All the people at my hospital are as well. I have compassionate friends. We all are a compassionate set of humans. And if we see suffering, we want to do something to alleviate that. Empathy is a little bit different. Empathy is more of an emotional connection. I kind of think about how to explain empathy in the conversation technique of shift or support. Have you ever heard of that?
Shift or support.
So in a conversation, if I want to be empathetic to someone, then I need to support them instead of shift it back to me. And let me give you an example. Someone comes up to me and says, I am so sad. A shifting conversation would be, I know what you mean. I was so sad too. I understand. Now, that's not a wrong response, but a more empathetic response would be if someone comes to me and says, I'm so sad. That I say, oh man, I hate that you're having such a bad day. Tell me about that. What do you think about today is making you so sad? So that's entering into the emotions with them instead of trying to shift it back to yourself, which we all
let me tell you about my story.
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, I don't think that's wrong. And you mentioned a blog post that I did. I think there's a time to tell our story because sometimes that's what someone needs to be encouraged or inspired, or this worked for me. Maybe it will work for you as well. But just general empathetic conversation is think of shift or support. Don't shift it back to you, but support them and what they're feeling and put it back on them.
Well, there's kind of a patience, it seems, there, not jumping ahead, but let's just wait right here and know that I've heard it said with empathy, it's just knowing that you're with them, making someone feel that you're with them, not skipping ahead of how that can relate to something maybe you've heard of or faced in your own life. But that's helpful.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Okay, so in addition to everything that you've already faced in the last 20 years, in 2021, you were diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer.
Yes.
Yet today, you have no evidence of cancer, but if you would just tell us a little bit about that journey in the last 3 years.
I will. I was working at full-time in the job that I loved, and I was looking ahead for about 4 years. I was hoping to retire, travel with my husband. And so I was thinking ahead, and I thought, I want to get physically fit. I don't want to go into retirement and then get sick or be so out of breath and out of shape that I can't do what I want to do. So I joined a little local boot camp and spent several months there. I'm not an exercise. My family, we're not a family of exercisers as a rule, so this was different for me, and it's not something that I particularly enjoyed, but it was self-care. And there was a period of about 2 weeks where I was unable to do some of the exercises that I had been doing fairly easily. And it was dramatic and it was quick. And so there was some kind of change in my body that I knew wasn't normal. And it wasn't that I was just out of breath. It was my body is starved for oxygen here. Well, my family, we have heart disease in our family, not that much cancer. So I made an appointment with a doctor and I went in. I said, I think I need a cardiology consult. And he said, okay, let's get you one. He said, let me do a chest x-ray too. And I went, I'm so busy. I'm busy. I don't have time for a chest x-ray today. And he said, okay. He said, let me just put the order in and you go when you got time. And so I went ahead and it was Friday afternoon. So I went ahead and just made the trip over to the hospital and, checked in, had to wait, and it took a while. But he called me before I even got home. And he said, I'm seeing something on your x-ray. He said that I didn't expect to see. He said, now, I don't think I'm worried about this. He said, I think you've got a history of histoplasmosis. He said, but let's investigate this. I'm going to schedule for a CAT scan. So I thought, okay. Well, a week or two later, I had the CAT scan. And as soon as I saw the characteristics of what we were describing, I thought, I think how in this world? I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. How can I have cancer? And so we did the biopsy, and over the next few months, it came to light that it was not just in my lung, but it was in my brain, in my bone, lymph nodes, and it had no symptoms except for shortness of breath on exertion. Had I not been at that boot camp, I would not have found it.
Just connecting these two parts of your story, did you find that your experience of the loss of Jae Lynn in any way prepared you for now this cancer journey and this news and what you were facing? Did it inform the other, or had they just been completely separate and difficult journeys?
They very separate and distinct in that, I'll be honest, losing Jae Lynn was much harder than getting a diagnosis of terminal cancer. The panic and then the fear that I felt on my cancer diagnosis, and I did have some for the first week or two. Surprisingly, what I felt when I kind of looked back and really kind of dug down into it, it was grief. I didn't want to leave Ralph and my husband of 44 years and my daughters. I had a lot of life I wanted to do with them. I still felt young and healthy, and I wanted to spend more life with them. I also was brokenhearted at the idea of leaving them grief-stricken again, because I kind of felt like I would if losing me was going to be incredibly hard, and I didn't want them to have to go through that again. I'd seen them go through that, and I wanted to spare them. So, I think just understanding and being a learner and very knowledgeable about grief, I was able to kind of pinpoint that, in that it wasn't necessarily that I was afraid I was going to die, because dying for me is kind of like the next adventure. After Jae Lynn died, I was obsessed with heaven, and so I learned about that. And I don't feel like I'm afraid to die. Now, like most of us, I don't want to suffer, but death doesn't scare me. I'm kind of jazzed at the thought of going somewhere where I'm even more alive now than I am now.
Well, can you describe, I want to talk about hope for a moment. Can you describe a moment when hope maybe surprised you on your journey?
I can.
Following Jae Lynn's death, or even in this more recent cancer journey that you've been on?
There's, after her death, probably in the months after her death, up until that time in our life, we used dry erase markers, and we would grab a dry erase marker and we would write notes to each other on the mirror. The kids would make their shopping list, or, homework reminders, or sometimes I would just write encouraging notes. So we always had dry erase markers that are real easy to wipe off your mirror in your bathrooms and other places. And so I picked one up pretty early in my grief process, within the first few months, and I wrote across the mirror, "What now?" And it and I looked at that every morning, "What now? What now?" And it kind of put it back in my lap that I'm going to have to do something with this. I'm going to have to figure this out, how to do this well, because I felt very hopeless. So I began to learn about it. It's when I did my deep dive into books. But I'll say that I was, as a parent, when you lay down at night, you kind of tick off all your kids. Okay, Jae Lynn's here, Casey's here, Abby's here. Well, after her death, I would go, okay, Abby's in bed, Casey's bed, Jae. Jae Lynn's in heaven. I don't know where Jae Lynn is. I mean, I know she's there, but I don't know enough about heaven to be comfortable with that. All the views that I had of heaven just weren't working for me anymore. And so I really did a deep dive into heaven. There's a verse that says, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. That used to kind of be mysterious to me, kind of that's a mystery. It's mystical, unseen, and hoped for. And I never really fully understood that faith, it just wasn't very concrete for me. For some reason, in the grief, I kind of focused on the word substance and evidence. Faith is the evidence of things unseen, the substance of things. Well, those are scientific terms. Those are very provable things. And so that kind of directed my study into heaven, and that changed everything about her being gone, knowing that I'm going to go, knowing that all the people that I love that have already gone, we're all going to be together again, and in a physical place that is as real as this studio that we're sitting in right now. That is where my hope went, and that is what made life not hopeless for me, is the eternal hope that I have in God.
I wanted to ask about community support. We started this, and you're obviously very active in engaging with others in your own story. You want to hear their stories. But over the last 20 years, can you talk a little bit about the role of community support in the grief and the healing process?
I can. We are relational people. We need connections. Now, I completely embrace the idea that we're all different, that some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts. Some people can go to a party and it just wears them out. They've just all peopled out, at the end of the party.
I can do that.
Yes. I think there's probably all of us can. But there are times, though, when we're in a hard time where what has worked for us in the past might not be what works for us during this moment. And I found that to be true. My best therapy was not on a couch with a psychiatrist. It was over lunch with a friend who had experienced a similar loss. And it was during the support groups of other bereaved parents that I really felt the connection. Like I was helping others, others were helping me. We were able to share the journey. Very different than just a general grief group. Now that certainly works for a lot of people, and I'm not saying that that's not effective, but very specific support groups, whether that's Alcohol Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, suicide support groups, bereaved parents, neonatal loss. Those things are helpful. Even if you can't get to them personally, nowadays you can find them digitally, and you can go online and you can get a lot of resources and a lot of support there. If you go on Facebook, you can type in any diagnosis, any problem that you might be facing. There's some support groups for it. So social media, I think, has been amazing in helping people through hard things because it's an online support group. And you might think, well, I don't know those people. I tell you, the things that I see people share on there, it's like I'll reach out to them and sometimes send them private messages, and it's raw and it's real. And we talked about the compassion and the empathy. It's all the responses that just get added to that of, hang on, you're doing good. That might come from across the world, and I feel it. Social media is a place for connections. I know it gets a lot of, bad press sometimes, and because there's some bad stuff on there. But have you ever seen anybody just log on and say, all right, friends, it's a long day. I'm going to bed. Good night. I hope I'm near my Facebook when they say that, because that's such an intimate thing to share to the world. And so I always say, good night, sleep tight. It's almost like someone has said that in their living room to your family, but yet they're going on the World Wide Web and saying that. So it's a great place for connections, I think. Anyway, I think that my advice would just be to connect somewhere, find some resources. If you can't do it personally, do it online.
Well, I like how you said that what maybe worked for someone in the past, if they hit this wall in their life, whatever that may look like, maybe it doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And then,
Right.
they may not know what to do. And as you're talking about grief and hope together, and you've even said that they're intertwined, perhaps, in the midst of someone facing unimaginable tragedy, and as you're hearing stories and sharing stories, how do you reconcile the two, grief and hope? And how, as you're communicating with others and you say you want to be there whenever someone is in the midst of that, and you wish you could reach out to them because maybe you've been there. How do you help them through that, where hope can be there as well?
Right. That's a good question. We've talked a lot about hope. I think the name of this podcast, is about hope. Hope it's kind of a positive emotion. When we talk about hope, that we usually think of something as positive. But there are times in our life when we just don't feel like we have room for that. And I think especially after a loss, in those first few weeks, months, when things are so fresh. And I think there's a time sometimes for pulling in, for withdrawing, for kind of getting quiet, maybe getting alone, processing it. Just you're wounded so deeply and you can't get out. But then I think that it can easily get into hopelessness. Now, hopelessness is there's nothing positive about that. That's a dangerous place to be. It's not normal if somebody feels hopeless. In fact, a lot of the suicides are because they don't feel like there's a way out of this. So when we're thinking about grief, or whether it's cancer or whatever hardship someone's facing, I think my goal is to move, if I see somebody that I feel like is hopeless, is to not necessarily move them to joy. That's not possible. That's not realistic. But if I can just give them a little bit of hope. Sometimes that's in the form of a text, a visit, a lunch, a support. Hey, don't just join me at this support group. How about I come pick you up? And you just kind of help them. And then when they're there, they see other people and they see that maybe everyone else isn't hopeless like they are. And so maybe there is room to entertain an idea that maybe this pain won't always last, and that this is just a moment in my time. It's not going to be permanent. And so, like I said, I think we can easily move someone out of hopelessness if they're open. Not everybody's open to that, to be honest. It's a very hard place for us to love people from. When we see people that we love that are feeling hopeless, and we say, "How about this?" And they go, "No, it won't work." How about this? Not doing that. How about go here with me? No, I'm not interested in that. There has to be some, there's a point to where they have to participate. But a lot of times that's just persevering and loving and coming back and say, I'm with you here. You're not alone. I'll help you. Let's do this together. And so moving them to hope, I think, is so important. We all need hope. All of us need hope.
Well, I like what you said. It leaves room for stages in the process too, right? Because in the midst of someone facing something that they never imagined that they would face, not starting with, again, let me tell you about my situation, or, well, at least it's that maybe you can't get there yet. I like how you said that, but let's just know that I'm with you right now.
There was,
and then we'll go from there.
As a nurse in intensive care, I was caring for patients at times who would be the victims of an accident, or maybe had a terrible stroke, and they were what we call brain dead. They were there was no hope of recovery. Maybe even organ donation was going to be in their future. And there was a period of days and waiting. And so the family had probably been given the message, there's no hope here. This person will not survive the week or the night or whatever. So sometimes they would come, I would be talking with them and giving them an update. There's their blood pressure, here's their heart rate. But I would always try to say something like, we gave her a bath a minute ago, and we rubbed her feet, and we did a little pedicure on her, and we combed her hair and brushed her teeth. And man, if she was able, she would love how we just made her feel. We did her a little spa. The family would take that information and go out and share that with the rest of their family. Go, she just had a spa. She just had something good happen. And so they just needed something good in such what was a hopeless situation. So that sometimes is, we got to stretch and try to find that moment for them.
There are others, some that, our hope is as they're listening, they may be facing their own, trying to navigate their own new normal after devastating news. How would you advise them to just get started? How to take steps forward in the midst of that from what your own experience has taught you?
With grief, I almost can promise you, no matter what grief someone is facing from the death of someone they love, they have acquaintances or family members or friends that have experienced something similar. So I would encourage them to make personal connections. And if they don't feel like they can do that, then at least go online and let's find some resources and support. There's a lot of places that, they can read poetry and writings and blogs and podcasts to get some knowledge, some inspiration, some encouragement. The support groups, what I like, Robert Niemeyer from Memphis, he's a grief counselor. He talks about the reason a support group is good. He said it's like if you're in a long line and suddenly there's a chair and you can sit down for just a few minutes and get the weight off your body for just a few minutes. He said then when you stand up, he said you're ready to go again. He said, and so that's what a grief support does. If it's physical, like what I was facing with cancer, once again, I'm a learner. And so as soon as I got diagnosed with this, I had to do a deep dive in the internet and do some searches. Well, there's ways to do that. And when I was looking at it, the statistics on lung cancer were pretty grim. And suddenly, I had been thinking I was going to get fit for retirement, and now I'm faced with, I don't think I'm going to make retirement. And so I kind of refined my search to go to Google Scholar instead of just Google, and so to kind of get some scientific basis on it. I'm very much a proponent of taking matters in your own hands and being your own advocate. There are no prizes for people who don't go to the doctor. I mean, it's like saying, I'm just tough and I don't need this typical screenings that everyone else. I haven't done that. And I'm horrified by that. And I'm wearing my family out all the time. You've got to get your screenings, your mammograms, your prostate exams, your colonoscopies. Now there's lung cancer screenings. A lot of people don't know about that. And so I'm such a proponent of that. Start as minute you can and keep it regularly.
Becky, we really appreciate your vulnerability, your courage, and sharing your powerful story. Is there anything else you want to be able to share today with anyone who may be here?
I think we've covered it, Adam. Thank you for doing this podcast. I think the world needs hope. I'm just grateful to be a part of this.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure.